Rahim. So welcome everyone to our second plenary session. We are delighted to have among us Professor Somyan Bandyopadhyay, who will be speaking about vernacular houses in the interior region of Oman from a very interesting perspective. Prof. Somyan is the head of school and Sir James Sterling Chair in Architecture at the Liverpool School of Architecture. He also directs the Center for the Study of Architecture and Cultural Heritage of India, Arabia, and the Maghreb, Archaya. This is an interdisciplinary forum with research projects in Oman, Qatar, Morocco, and India. His teaching and research interests are focused on the historical, theoretical, and contextual approaches to architectural design and the architecture and settlements of India and the Middle East. He has previously held professional positions at Manchester School of Architecture and also at Nottingham Trent University. Professor Somyan has extensive experience of architectural practice in India and the Middle East, and has undertaken advisory and consultancy work in urban development, regeneration, architectural and urban design, and conservation as well. In addition to his published works in journals, he is also the author of monographs and edited volumes, including Siting and Composition by Routledge in 2016, and Manah Omani Oasis, Arabian Legacy by Liverpool University Press in 2011. He also co-edited the Territories of Identity, Architecture in the Age of Evolving Globalization, Routledge 2013, and The Humanities in Architectural Design, A Contemporary and Historical Perspective, Routledge 2007. Prof. Somyan is currently working on a monograph on Muscat entitled Cosmopolitan Muscat, Omani Architecture of a Globalizing Port City, due to be published in late 2022. And with this, Prof, I give you the floor to share with us what you have to say about the vernacular dwellings in Central Oman. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Benkari. Thank you very much, and thank you, the Sultan Qaboos University and the conference for allowing me to present some of my thoughts and also to deliver a keynote speech, which is a great honor. And I think, as was just mentioned, that I have worked in Oman and in the Gulf region for a long time, especially in Oman, and that's where much of my expertise lies. In Oman, I'll just provide a few background slides just to show what we do. We work as a team, and I think that's very important that we understand that in heritage, in architectural history, and so on, in humanities, a more team-based approach is very important to produce and to cover the kind of complexity that we need to cover. It is essentially an interdisciplinary area of investigation, which needs archaeologists to ethnographers to architects to architectural historians to different a range of expertise, and that's, I think, what we try to do through our CATE. We have an in-house team, a strong in-house team of experts, and then we draw on other experts as needed, and that's how we operate as almost a kind of a research center, come practice center within the University of Liverpool. We have been working, as was said, in India, in Oman, mainly in Qatar with the Qatar the Qatar National Library, and also in Morocco. And this has led to a number of projects which can be seen on the RKM website, which is, there are various projects. A lot of those are obviously on Oman. In terms of the historical, and the focus of my work is historical and theoretical work on Oman. Much of it is on Oman, and that is to do with both the interior of Oman, but also the coast. And I'll just go into the difference in a moment, but it is quite important that we understand that these two entities are mutually dependent entities, and they have been developing over many centuries, according to those kind of slight differences, but also common grounds. We have also been working closely with the Ministry of Heritage and Tourism now, Ministry of Tourism previously as well, and various other bodies to produce heritage management plans, which we've been also, these have been published, but also that one of those at least has been taken into a greater degree of implementation, whereby working with stakeholders very closely and also working with children through workshops and so on, we developed certain strategies for a phase 1 implementation, which has now been implemented within in Misotolabri, which is it's a unique project in the sense that this kind of approach and this kind of work has not happened in Oman previously. So we're very proud of that, and we hope that this will create a greater impact. But coming back to what I'm going to talk about today, that Oman is really formed between the sand and the sea. That is that the Indian Ocean is one of the kind of key factors which has shaped up Oman, but also the population movement within the Arabian Peninsula, which has been over many centuries, has been an important factor in shaping up the southeastern part, the Oman Peninsula, in quite an important way. So it's between the sand and the sea that we have this huge landmass, an island almost of landmass, which has developed its particular characteristics. And that's where I think, and obviously, as we know, on the right-hand side slide, you see the extensive connections, the Indian Ocean connections that existed over many centuries with Oman and the ancient world, as well as the kind of evolving medieval world and the colonial world. So Oman has played a very important role in that one. But we are not, today I'm not talking about that kind of coastal side of things, which has obviously produced really fantastic sites like Matra, where on the right hand side you see the Surah Lawat here, which is a collection of beautiful buildings, which has got influences coming from all directions, from India, from East Africa, and so on. I'm mainly talking about the interior of Oman, central Oman, I would say broadly, but that includes the Dakhliya, which is the central Omani, inner Oman, if you like, and the Shakir regions, where large oasis settlements like this one in Iski, for example, has been established over certainly since pre-Islam, and these settlements have developed, these oasis settlements have developed a particular characteristic, and also the kind of dwelling type that I think is quite important to consider. My position on this one is that the traditional Islamic dwelling that we often talk about, which is kind of courtyard-based dwelling, does not apply entirely to central Oman, to these oasis sites. Here, the dwelling is not just based around a courtyard. In fact, it very rarely has a courtyard, but it has got a first floor terrace, and it has got different spatial elements which begin to kind of come together to form the role of the courtyard. So the first floor terrace and the ladies' majlis, if I could loosely call it, are the kind of two elements which begin to shape up the dwelling's sort of core space. And this, during the day and the night, kind of fluctuates between the courtyard, the terrace on the upper floor, and the ladies' majlis on the ground floor. These two elements are then complemented by other elements of various descriptions of galleries and dahis, which can actually create quite an interesting but also important comfort condition, which they have adapted to, the Omanis have adapted to over many centuries again. So I'm focusing on these central Omani oasis settlements. Now these go as far towards the coast as Bosher, which is just currently effectively a suburb of Muscat, but an ancient oasis nevertheless. from there to Shakir region. So, for example, this one is in Madeira. The oasis settlements do actually perform the same kind of characteristics. There are largely, as I say, the courtyard is absent. The terrace and the first floor terrace is one of the kind of key focus of our work. Just to provide a context for where we are talking about, this is the Oman Mountains, mountain range, which cuts through the entire Omani Peninsula and creates the kind of seaward narrow strip of coastal strip, and then the kind of the extensive foothill region where some of the ancient oasis settlements are located. For example, Bahala, Nizwa, Iski, Mana, and so on, which are on the southern side, if you like, of this formidable range, and then before it goes towards the emptiness of the desert. And now in section, this is shown through from the coastal area near Musna, where the land is nearly flat, and then it gradually rises, and then we go through the ravines and the peaks of the Jebel Akhtar, and then gradually it goes down into the flats of the wadis on the inner foothill side, which is where the more important settlements are located. And finally, it kind of peters out towards the Rab Khali, which is the Great Desert in Central Arabia. Now, we all know that these settlements were established, probably many of these were established in pre-Islamic times, but they were supported by extensive water irrigation for large irrigation systems, which has its origins, as has been kind of conclusively proven now, from around 1000 BCE. Evidence has both been present from Mysore and Sharqiya area, as well as in the UAE. The Falaj system operates on different types of Falaj systems. Dawoodi Falaj works on tapping aquifers. The Aini Falaj relies on springs, and also the Gaili Falaj relies on surface flow within the Wadi system. So these are the kind of structuring that has always been there. But also when in the 17th century, new towns came up, if I could say that, like Barkat al-Mawz, al-Hamra, Misr al-Labrin, and the revamping of a number of other settlements. These actually followed the same pattern. They revamped the oasis Falaj system, irrigation system, the economic structure, but also the dwelling structures that continued to have the same kind of appearance. So just on the right hand side, an example from Sohar, which is a courtyard type house, sorry, where most of the facilities are located around against the wall, the outside wall, which is very well documented, against again a wall, and which may have connected courtyards with a corridor, with a gallery or dahris, and then a series of rooms, and that would also include wells and other kind of facilities, possibly around the kind of entrance area, the wells and various other facilities. This is the date collection area where the date syrup is extracted from the kind of storage of date. And if necessary, there would be a second floor, the upper floor, but that would be accessed through an external staircase, as is evident from this particular one. As opposed to that, if you look into the Omani, central Omani houses, which are very tight, very compact, and they mainly, this is a larger house from Mana, and it's a Wardi house, it's belonging to the Wardi tribe. Entrance, and then a staircase which would go up, and then a small little shamsiya or a light shaft, and you have the various, there is a shop for this particular one and various storage areas and so on. A water well again at the back, and I'll come back to this water well, and a bathing area for women, but also that's a prayer area, and I'll come back to that in a moment. There are storage areas which also sometimes doubled up as slave confinement zones at very earlier times, and there is also the women's majlis, which will be the focus of a bit of my discussion here. So that's the kind of ground floor. On the upper floor, as you go up the staircase, you'd have a large terrace Possibly part of the terrace will be covered by sort of a loggia or dairies where women can work under the shade. And you would have a number of living rooms, sleeping rooms, kitchen, for example, here, which comes off the main terrace, as well as pit latrine, which would be on the upper floor as well. And the nice soil will be collected in a pit in the lower level, which will be periodically extracted. So that's a kind of arrangement that most of the Omani dwellings of central Oman and Shirkia region will have. And I'll focus, to start with, I'll focus with the settlement of Mana, which where I've worked over a long period of time, and we're continuing to work on different aspects of that, still now, which is an ancient settlement and played a very important cultural role from the early Ibadi times, but certainly also in the 14th, 15th, 16th centuries when Ibadi revival took place, where Mana played a very important role and also provided an imam for a short period of time. It also provided an important artistic expression, which is the decorated mihrab, which really came out of Mana. And across central and eastern Oman, there are a number of existing decorated mihrab from coming out of the artisans from Mana. So just a quick idea of the central settlement within Mana Oasis, which is Harth al-Bilad, where we have a kind of fortified settlement with towers guarding the north and the south, as you would have seen in the previous image. And then there are streets going from north to south and east to west. There are gates on the west, gates on the east, north gate here, south gate here. And as you can see, a very dense fabric within the settlement. So one small dwelling would be this one, which we had actually taken some temperature and humidity measurements some time back when the buildings were still in reasonably recently deserted, but they were still pretty much intact. So again, the same arrangement. As you can see, you enter into this room, which in the case of the smaller dwelling like this will perform the women's lounge in the Majlis area. And then there are surrounding that a number of storage areas and so on, and a water well in the far corner. Then the staircase goes up to upper level. In the mezzanine level, there would be another lounge-like space, which also doubles up as space for drying agricultural produce. So, for example, onions, garlic, and so on, which were produced and were dried up in that sort of room here. And then the staircase continues to the upper floor, where you have the terrace on the upper floor. The terrace then leads to sleeping quarters, sleeping rooms over here, these two, and then a kitchen, which has got an extended out terrace, and as usual, the pit latrine on the upper floor and storage areas. So that's the kind of pattern, as you can see, even in the bigger or the smaller buildings, that's the kind of pattern that's being followed. There's an example of the terrace where the sleeping rooms are on the right, on the top image. And then this is the kitchen extension into the terrace, the entrance, and then the staircase. And the staircase, as we know in many cases, would be also works very important to ensure privacy. So when we looked into some of the temperature variations, while temperature during the day rises up quite quickly in the upper floor rooms, and the temperature in that ladies' majlis, the women's majlis, even though it was exposed to the main street, still rose, but actually flattened out, quite quickly. So it had a kind of uniform temperature after, from about midday onwards. And that is really, at different points, when it rained, the temperature was even lower, but the range, as you can see, is much lower than the range that you would normally have for the upper level rooms. So clearly the upper level was becoming almost unlivable at that point during the day, middle of the day, and then including the sleeping group quarters, but the lower level was at a much better temperature. Humidity-wise, again, that if you look into the upper level rooms begin to lose humidity very quickly, and by say about 2 o'clock, is the humidity level is in the tens. It's about 10 or 12% the relative humidity, whereas in the lower level room, the humidity is maintained to a kind of a relatively higher level. So therefore, in terms of both temperature, but also in terms of humidity, it has a better environment. And it also marks about a 12-degree difference from the street outside, immediately outside. So if the immediate street outside would have been, say, 44 or 45, 46 degrees, this would be in the just early 30s in terms of the temperature in that inside room. So clearly this provided a much better living condition. And that really helped in terms of alternating between the upper level and the lower level. So as you can see that the upper level becomes uninhabitable in say about by middle of the day, and then much of the work has to take place downstairs. So in that room, the wood dwelling that I've actually indicated before, you would see that the terrace again with a little bit of a shamsia, but this loggia begins to work as a kind of a covered area. On the left-hand side, we have some sleeping quarters, but also the kitchen and so on, which are available for work. So, and there is this interesting grain storage area, which is off one of the rooms here as well. So these areas, these loggias would often be used as kitchen. As you can see from this another building, which is from where the hearth is located either in a separate designated room, or in this particular case in this kind of loggia area. So that's how even in the larger ones, this is from Nezua, where we find that the kitchen was actually on the top floor, as those two holes, the openings indicate the kind of the kitchen space behind it, and the organization is very similar to the ones that we saw in Mana. So what is happening is that the climatic condition of the dwellings and the relative comfort of the different parts of the building begin to then work with the five prayers, which begin to break down the time of the day into different sections or fragments of the social time. So what happens with the women at home? They're not necessarily always at home. Of course, they're assisting the men at for domestic chores, but also for work in the fields as well. So, for example, that if we go through from the early morning after the prayer at home, they wake up the children and they prepare the children for them to go to the madrasa. They assist in early morning. They assist the male in the fields or do their domestic chore. But after that, around about 11 o'clock or so, they will actually have a female meet at home, and that would actually pull together a number of people from that local neighborhood or from the tribe. And this early morning one is called the duha, and that is either preceded or after that the cooking the lunch takes place. So it's either before that or after that, and then they have the lunch at home. So, and then the prayer at home, they do the Zuhur prayer at home, and then they sometimes work in the fields or dwellings if the weather is good, but mainly in the dwellings. And they have another meet, potentially a female meet, which is a ta'asir at home, and then work in the fields or dwellings. Now, then in the Asr, they have, they pray at home, attend to work, or they also collect firewood or fodder, and then come back and cook for the evening. So that's a kind of pattern. But what is interesting is the role that the female gathering takes place. Normally, you'd have the gatherings in houses where the women have had children, and that's a kind of tradition that has often been observed in Omani houses. And so this would take place irrespective of age, at an elderly women's house or a younger women's house, and you would have these meets. And you would normally have the normal kind of replication of the male meeting one with coffee and dates and so on. But also if they have to tend to young children or toddlers, then they will have a crib, possibly, as a kind of example from the right hand side shows, a small crib which will help them to look after the children at the same time. And the meet, whether it's the duha or the tasir, would take place in those designated women's lounges, or in the kind of the poorer dwellings would be in the case of the front room. But at the same time, there is the women's role in terms of organizing the ground floor of the house is quite significant too. So, for example, in the Wurud house, you would have this prayer area, number 5, and there is a well which can be accessed both from the back as well as from inside the house. Now, from inside the house, this works as a bathing area for the women and the prayer area for the women. At the other end, the women from the community, either that same tribe or the community, the close community, will actually have access to the water, but also be able to do their own bathing if they don't have a well in their house. So that the bathing and the prayer is an integral part of the house, although there are majazas or communal, women's communal prayer and bathing areas within settlements, and that is true for settlements like Barkat al-Maus, but also a small space in Mana, which was in part of a house, but nevertheless was used as a kind of communal bathing and prayer area. So these would be provided from the back end of the house, where the front end obviously brings in the male of the family and so on. So what's happening at the same time with the men? The men are going out to the agricultural land to do their to tend to the land, to the farm, but at the same time they might actually take a small rest, and these typical small little these enclosures are often providing them with a bit of comfort and a bit of a rest in between the hard work, or they're going up to the souk obviously during the day at different points, and those are the kind of key activities which shape up the male activities from the morning. So working in the fields, and then again coming back to have lunch at home. But what I'll focus on is that how this the dwelling comfort and the kind of settlement, how these two things complement each other. And I'll focus on the role of the sabla, the male meeting hall, which is something quite important and unique to Oman in many ways, and that actually shapes up the settlement, the privacy of the settlement and the publicity of the settlement around the key prayer areas. So what I will focus on is that how the sabla actually forms part of the male congregation, when the women may be actually at home meeting possibly other women as well at the same time, or doing the domestic chore. It is quite possible that if the men are wanting to come back to the house, but they see the women actually meeting, they will not actually come to the house, but they will go back to the sabla instead. So the sabla is normally something that would be closely associated with the mosque. For example, in this particular case, on the western gate, you have the mosque here, this mosque in Masjid al-Rahba, and then there is a water well, and then the sabla is located above it. The sabla has an access from here up the staircase. Then you have a long sabla which has an extension out. Now the sabla in section is over there, which is it straddles the main entrance. Now the opportunity of this particular projection, which is over here, is that it actually also provides excellent view of anyone walking up to the entrance. So therefore, sablas are both points of surveillance. As you can see from the left-hand side, the window, the opening, provides views down the wall, along the city wall, so that any incoming or approaching groups or individuals could be located. At the same time, the Sabla is the place where the mail meets, so therefore the coffee sessions take place, the date and the coffee sessions take place, the discussions about everyday life, but also anything that is happening in the national life or the local life in the regional area, and so on. The Sabla has always been a part of that. So the Sabla can vary in quality and in terms of their requirement. For example, this is again the main Sabla area in Mana at the northern end, next to the gate. So as you come in, there is this large tall tower, and then there are two sablas here. One, the back one on the image on the right hand side, which is the prominent one, which is the Wali sabla. This is where, for example, when in 1970 Sultan Qaboos assumed power, he came and visited the settlement and actually spent some time in that sabla. But you can see that the sabla has not only the space on the ground, on the first floor, the ground floor being taken up by cattle and mules and so on. And on the terrace as well, there was an opportunity to meet up on a very hot summer day evening. In the front, though, there is this adjoining it is another sabla, which is this sabla, which was a sabla which was dedicated to being a madrasa, but most importantly, it was where the Falaj water auction would take place. So Falaj Fikain's water auction would take place here. So the meetings would have different dimensions to it. Sometimes it's a general meeting, but it's also the kind of more important and the poignant meetings that would take place as part of the settlement. Now, as I was saying that, having the coffee, as we well know, but in the sabla, normally sitting on the floor, particular designated individuals serving the coffee from the part of the tribe or the tribe or the group, the associated groups, and the coffee sessions will go on around either before, as I said, or after the prayer. And those are also the places where important things will be discussed. This left-hand side one was the now almost disappearing sabla from Iski in Harthul, Yemen, but also places where even now major discussions will take place. For example, when we presented Ms. Fathullah Breen work to the local community, we presented it in the sabla there. But so sabla continues to be an important part, although it has lost its original character, I must add, and the kind of the scale of it has grown to a level where it is no longer the kind of the compact sort of space that was there. And when in the 17th century, the investment in land took place and large settlements like Barkat al-Mauz and came up, where the Yariba Imamate invested a huge amount of money into it from different sources and so on, from overseas trade and everything else. It created these large settlements. Now, these settlements were essentially what I would say is mono-tribal settlement. Mana, as I'll show you in a moment, was Harat al-Bilad especially was a multi-tribal settlement because it was almost like a kind of cosmopolitan existence where many tribal groups from different parts of central Oman will have come together and existed over a long period of time. Whereas many of these settlements, for example, Harat al-Sebani in Barkat al-Mauz, would be, although they have different groups. For example, on the right-hand side, this is Harat al-Sebani. Although the color coding shows that there are different groups, but essentially they're part of the Bani Riyam Tribal Confederation. So therefore, the intermarriage and the kind of relationships and the political cohesion allowed them to operate in a slightly different manner, as opposed to Mana, for example, as you can see, where there are a myriad of tribal groups. Some are more numerous than others, but nevertheless, there is quite a diversity, where the role of the sabla was much more aligned with the association with a particular tribe and their tribal affiliates. So each tribe will have their designated tribal area, sabla, whereas in the case of and they will be dissociated from dwellings mostly. They will not be part of houses. Sabla will be completely separated from the houses, whereas in the case of the monotribal situations, the sablas will be effectively parts of houses. So for example, a house like this or a house like this would actually contain the sabla within it. So for example, that on the right hand side, this is a sabla from Barkat al-Maus, where you see the sabla and the house is integrated into each other and it's part of the same thing, which wouldn't happen in a multi-tribal situation. So the tribal ordering actually would add another layer of spatial ordering to these organizations, but also the bathing areas, which would be normally very highly protected in the case of multi-tribal societies. In the case of Barkat al-Maus, where there's a monotribal situation, even the women's bathing areas would be located along the main Falaj water channel, obviously given a high degree of privacy, but nevertheless given the water channel. So this coming to the end of this talk, what I'm trying to say is that this house, the dwelling, has got a particular character which is unique in Central Oman, that it is, and it actually works very clearly with the temperature and the relative humidity, and the building performance is connected to the social performance. The social performance in the dwelling operates in a way that during the early mornings, much of the work, the chore related to the upper level, including some of the cooking, would be done, and the family would then descend to the lower level, the ground floor. And the upper level will be protected through a series of architectonic measures like staircases, for example, to create the additional privacy that it needs on the upper floor. Whereas, and you can see on the right hand side, just one image from Nizwa, where an upper floor terrace is now used by the local, the male of the family as a workshop as well, but nevertheless it's still used as a family gathering space, and that is given a high degree of privacy. So as the lower level operates during the day, the lower level becomes, as the temperature goes up and the humidity comes down, the lower level female majlis becomes the kind of core of the area, which operates in a way that and coordinates with the 5 prayers of the day, and when the male are actually away in their sabla. The sabla operates in tandem with this to complement this sort of private life. The sabla is also in some way characterized by the tribal organization, but also the kind of the various demands, whether it's to do with organization of water or defensive features and so on and so forth, or for actually hosting, visiting groups of tribesmen. They would be actually put up in sabla. So the sabla begins to work in a more male congregational way, but with its own variety of activities. Now, as the evenings come, when the temperature goes down on the outside as well, these kind of dead-end lanes, say the darabs, for example, here, the 2 examples on the left-hand side, they become the kind of places where families would come out, and this becomes a kind of expansion of private zone into the public's, into the otherwise civic space, so that these areas would then be visited by male immediate family members, but not from other parts of the society. So, in concluding, what we would like to say, I would like to say is that this sort of complementary nature of the Omani society and the way that was characterized by both the prayers, but also by the temperature and the humidity of the dwelling, is something that is unique and needs a lot more investigation. But certainly that's something that we can learn from and understand and utilize in our future environments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Somian, for this fascinating presentation. As usual, very engaging, and at least to my interest, it's always enriching to listen to your findings. We have a couple of questions in the chat, and I think all of them are from Professor Susan.
Yeah.
The first one is, in S21, how do you know what functions of each room were?
Yeah, I think this is our work has happened over since the 1990s, from the early 1990s. So we have had, as I was mentioning, that we have had the opportunity to ethnographically document many of the inhabitants, whether they were at that moment inhabiting some of these houses, in the case of Nizwa, for example, or where erstwhile inhabitants were available, in the case of Mana, which was in 1993-94 onwards. We have been documenting their lives quite a lot. Certainly, I think, therefore, we understand the role played by the different spaces through ethnographic work, and the use pattern has been defined that way. Clearly, we are everywhere. Every settlement that we've been working on, we not only document physically, we also document those from an ethnographic perspective. We document the large working systems, infrastructures, and the kind of tribal system as well. So we work on different levels of that. Now, yes, certainly they do sleep, of course, on the terrace as well, but I was mainly focusing on what was happening during the day, which would be let's not forget that in the peak of summer, they might actually not live in these old settlements at all. When these settlements were fully active, they would be actually in either an arish or a mud brick hut, in their agricultural land. Therefore, that would provide the canopy of the tree canopy would provide a degree of comfort within that. So that would be the kind of normal practice. Do they not have a rest after lunch in the hottest months? I think not normally at home, because many of the men typically would actually go and spend the time either in the sabla or in those arish sort of hutmans that I was showing in the agricultural land. Did the tribes fight each other? Of course, many of these settlements, the history of the settlements are about tribal warfare, about tribal cohesion, tribal segregation, social ordering, complex economic and social stratification. So many of the practices, for example, that who offers kahwa or coffee in Savla is determined by one's position within that tribal group. So there are many complexities in those areas, and they are also spatially ordered. There are certain practices with certain trades which would be performed by certain groups of people, and that is very clearly demarcated. I have two questions. Is this a World Heritage Site? You have shown an image where 3 women were sitting in the female majlis wearing hijab. Is this a symbolic image or a setting in a house under regular use? Mana is not a World Heritage Site. Mana is a National Heritage Site. The neighboring World Heritage Site is Bahla World Heritage Site, which again we have documented extensively, and we have been working on that one too. But the Izki, for example, and various others, the Falad system of 5 major settlements, Barkat al-Mauz, Izki, and Al-Jila, Nizwa, and so on, have also been listed on the World Heritage Site, just as a water infrastructure. So there are different inscriptions on the World Heritage Site, but I think that these settlements are incredibly important and obviously it needs a huge investment. And you'll probably find that part of Mana had been rebuilt and restored, but largely rebuilt, I would say, by the Ministry of Heritage and Culture at an earlier time. I think there is now an intention to have an operator, a private operator, to sort of manage that. Now, the women in the Majlis, that was a real women's situation from Boshar, where this was from about 2006-07, where they kindly allowed me to photograph that while they were having their meet. And where is our other roofing materials? What are the roofing materials? Are the spans limited by the roofing material? The roofing material mainly is the quartered logs of date palm, but also sometimes hardwood is found. Hardwood is not readily available, so therefore often you'll find that the trade, as I was mentioning, the 17th century onwards, the trade that takes place, and Oman has always played a big role in the Indian Ocean trade, but especially with the control over Eastern African regions like Zanzibar, but also deep into Congo, then allowed timber imports. So larger dwellings in the Shirkia, for example, in Minzafa, for example, where there are larger spans available, possible because of the use of timber, whereas in these central Omani houses, which have replicated, for over centuries, building practices, they are typically quartered date palm logs, and then you have reeds, and then you have mats, and then layers of mud, compacted mud, and that's the way that this works. Other fallahs drying up with deep drilled motorized wells now pumping. Falaj, the water tables are changing. Surely it's been affected by the deep drilling deep wells. So, for example, certain areas have been experiencing water shortage, especially so. Around Mana, for example, many of the date palm lands are drying up, which is a very big, sad thing. As opposed to 50 kilometers farther down towards the desert, Adam has been flourishing. There's been plenty of water. So it's not only just the deep drilling, but also the periodic appearance and disappearance of or lowering of water tables that has happened since the earliest periods of civilization. If you remember that, with Kaaba, the Zamzam appeared and disappeared and reappeared. So the whole phenomena of springs appearing and disappearing because of water table depletion is something that has always been there in the Arabian Peninsula. Clearly, it has not been helped with the modern deep well practices, and that is unfortunate. However, the falah systems are being managed quite well, I would say, in many settlements. For example, in Barkat al-Mauz and Izwa, many of these are still active, and still agriculture, but also potable water collection is reliant on that. So it is still very active. I think I've answered most of the questions there.
Yes, indeed, you did. We still have a little bit of time if there are other questions. Here you go, another question. Do they live in summer home and homes?
I think they are not, these groups are not nomads. They are settled people, and I think in Oman, traditionally there was a kind of a division between, Hadar, as they say, Hadar and Badu, but a same tribe can have at its one end highly settled people, and at the other end nomadic groups of people. These are all settled population, and they would have, as I was mentioning, that they might have a summer home within their agricultural land when during the peak of summer, and then they will return to the winter homes, if you like, in the settlements proper. The settlements proper, I was showing them temperature measurements around July, August, largely uninhabited at that time, which means that the humidity was lower. and therefore then the dwelling performance was potentially acceptable to a temperature of 32, 33 degrees on the ground floor. Inhabited, it would actually become a lot higher in terms of its relative humidity inside. So that's so they would probably stay to some extent during the summer as well. And mind you, the winter is a very short window in Oman in those parts. And the nomads, on the other hand, would have their own, of course, the tents and arish huts and so on, but they will also have a foothold within settled areas. So, for example, they might own groves, and they will also bury their dead close to the oasis settlements. So these are the kind of practices of interchange that would take place. Are there many plans to conserve these houses and repurpose them into a heritage hotel? Okay, and then just very quickly, I think that tourism should be seen as only one part of the solution. If we go for only heritage hotels, then very quickly we'll run out of opportunities of what we can do. And therefore the capacity, and there's something that we have worked on in Masud Al Abreen and other locations, is to carry out extensive economic assessment of the carrying capacity and so on, and what can be possible and not possible. So if there are too many, and Miswat is already experiencing that because originally a bed and breakfast was very successful, there are now 5 or 6 bed and breakfasts. Now, immediately the asking price for a room goes down, and you would find that it is not possible to actually run a business like that. And this is where I think the ministries, all the kind of the associated stakeholders and knowledgeable informed stakeholders should actually play a role, and need to play a role, to make sure that a wider understanding of it is there. Heritage is there for development purposes. It's the developmental assess, unless we actually understand it that way, and that therefore there are normal living conditions that could be there. There is a training opportunity. There is knowledge base. There are a range of things that can be done, and unless that's there, it will not work. And Susan's other one is, I think, there's a real feature of social resilience. The same tribe occupies a range of ecological niches from Paris to the nomad tents. Yes. So at times of extremes, they can easily be. Absolutely, you're right. And this is something that we need to understand and learn. And I think it is also very important that we learn that, this kind of resilient way of living, inhabiting not necessarily a designated space in a single use pattern, but in a kind of multiple use, overlapping use, cross using, and the kind of the use of time and space in a plied way, if you like, kind of interacted way, is crucial to understanding how settlements can work in these sort of really delicate environmental conditions, and something that we have lost in terms of our current dwellings. And I think I'm not suggesting that we do not have to have air conditioning at all, but on the other hand, I think the air conditioning can be significantly reduced if we can actually pay attention to some of these key principles, as we have talked about and we know very well, but we are never applying to modern environments, and which is unfortunate. So, for example, the female majlis, the kind of ideas of the female majlis are still there, but they've effectively, sort of the julus, if you like, car julus, they're kind of becoming thoroughfares, spaces through which you move to another bedroom, and really the use of that as a space which can be used in different ways has often been reduced in modern houses. So the resilience is absolutely important. Yeah, thanks for bringing up that point.
Thank you very much, Prof. Sumyan, and to the questionnaire, to the audience for their questions. If I may add just a little comment about what's happening in the repurposing the houses. Besides what you mentioned about Misfat Labreen, now we are witnessing the same thing in Harat al-Aqr in Nizwa, of which you presented some pictures. where there are already 6 or 7 guest houses and future hotels being planned in the future. So totally, there has to be some action of master planning and regulating these kind of operations. That, on the other hand, we are happy that the Omanis are coming back to these settlements after more than 3 decades of deserting them and leaving them to decay. So it's a good thing that needs to be a little bit framed.
Sorry, can I just add on that one, this particular one, Naima, that I think there is a master plan that exists on Hartalaka, which we did in 2006. And that was one of the first ones that were done after Muscat, regeneration plan. And but that has never been put in place. And also that I think because there is the local inhabitants don't have the range of examples in front of them often. You know, the approaches taken are kind of quite questionable sometimes. And so therefore, I think the ministries and the other bodies should probably take steps in guiding and providing the kind of options and opportunities, you know, and the kind of guidance is crucial in these cases, so that, you know, they are not turned into something that they are not.
Yeah, I agree with you. And it is also a new phenomena that, and I have a paper that is coming out about this, that these kind of operations are started to become a bottom-up thing. And it's very nice to observe that the government is following the initiatives of the local communities. So this is the bright side of it. And Prof. Susan had another question about the internet connection to these settlements make a difference. They are connected.
Yeah. I think they're all well connected. I think one of the things that would of course help is also the, you know, going beyond tourism, going beyond a kind of superficial understanding of settlements and Oman's history, because Oman has a very strong history. And I think if the younger generation can come to know and embrace the qualities of that history and the culture in all its complexities. Every culture has its great highs and lows, but that is how we embrace the culture. And I think if we can embrace the culture and if we can actually assess it in the proper way, there's a lot of critical assessment that needs to be undertaken. And sometimes we are still addressing it on a kind of on a superficial level, and it would be really good to do. And for example, the other thing that can also happen is virtual experiences that can be given. So we are actually doing a virtual experience of exhibition on Mana based on one of the houses, where you can actually go around the house, but also you can pick up the history of Mana by clicking on, you know, the display on the wall, and you will have 3D scanned objects which are actually directly relevant to that place. So we will have a virtual exhibition which will, and a film, which will actually work together in tandem. So hopefully more virtual exhibitions, apps, digital apps would be really important to spread the word and to give access. So for example, that even in Misfat al-Abreen, where maybe elderly people may not be able to actually walk around this kind of quite challenging topography, they could, you know, take access to, have access to an app, which would give them an experience which would be really quite good.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid we will not take this last question because the next session needs to start. I'm so sorry, Eleni. I'm sure that Prof. Sumian will take note of this question and he will address it. Thank you, Prof. Sumian, again for this fascinating.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and thank you to the.
It's an honor. Thank you. Bye. Maslama.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye.